Israel bombing the Russian airbase in Syria. I used to pray for times like this. Okay. So we don't know the specifics of whether they bombed inside the airbase. I know some local news outlets like Levant 24, they're talking about it being inside the airbase. Other people are saying it's near the airbase. Either way though, it's either in or around the airbase manned by the Russians in Syria since about 2015. The Syrians gave them control of the base in 2015, and the Russians, and I think about 2017 or 2018, they made it so that they've controlled the base full time. And ever since then, they've been operating it like a Russian airbase in order to not only have, you know, a strategic foothold in Syria, but also to continue to support the Assad regime with their planes in a bombing campaign, because it was Russian air power that helped save the Assad regime from their own people. Now, the Russians and the Israelis, historically over Syria, have kind of just let bygones be bygones. The way it worked is that the Russians would bomb, you know, Syrians, and the Israelis every once in a while would come in, violate Syrian airspace, bomb some Hezbollah ammunition or storage facilities, bomb some storage facilities from some Iranian proxies, and then skedaddle. And the Russians would not interfere with it. There was like this tacit agreement, even if not openly stated, that the Israelis are able to go in and strike stuff as long as they didn't interact, bump into each other, and they weren't causing each other issues. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu also has a semi-friendly, or had a semi-friendly, it's hard to say where that state of relationship is right now, considering how the Russians are posturing over Palestine, semi-friendly relationship, to the point that Benjamin Netanyahu, in order to try to get the votes of Russian Jews in Israel, which they actually make up quite a large percentage of the population, I don't know if it's 20 or 25%, but a very significant part of the population, was releasing campaign banners with him shaking hands with Vladimir Putin. And so to go from that to this, after a year of bombing in the Gaza Strip and conflicts over the border between southern Lebanon and northern Israel, is quite a change. So let me read to you guys what happened, or what is suspected to have happened, because it's still not particularly clear. Israel conducted strikes near the Syrian coast this morning, with explosions reported in the vicinity of the Russian-operated Khamenei Air Base near the city of Latakia. At this stage, it's not clear if the Russian airfield was actually hit, deliberately or otherwise, which would be a first. Either way, however, the attacks represent a notable escalation in terms of Israel's willingness to prosecute targets that are very close to this key Russian military facility in Syria, and a major point of pride for Moscow. Here is some footage of the bombing and aftermath. Now, from the way this is reacting, as you can see, what it looks like pieces of shrapnel and munitions going into the air, slowly falling down, the continuous explosion. I do not believe these are all just continuous Israeli airstrikes. They don't look like. What this looks like is a bunch of secondary explosions. The Israeli bomb, what looks like to me, an ammunition storage facility, blew it up, and all of this is the secondary explosions. If there was rockets in there, then it's rockets. If it's artillery shells, then it's artillery shells. If it's just a bunch of strips of ammunition, it's a bunch of strips of ammunition. Grenades. You get the idea. Maybe all the above. I would suspect all of the above. So those, to me, these secondary explosions really lead me to believe that it was a weapons depot, an ammunition storage facility for some Iranian proxy, whether it was a transition point between Iran and Hezbollah in Syria, which that is what Syria is used as a transition point between Iran and Lebanon in order to ship weapons and munitions from Iran to the Lebanese. It's part of the reasons why the Iranians and Hezbollah fought so hard to keep Assad in power, is because they knew if the Assad regime collapsed, then they would lose that passageway. It's one of many reasons, but that's one of them. You can see there were some other videos as well that have been posted on social media by other people in the area. We already watched this one, but there's also this video. But it's all generally speaking the same thing. But you can see this is ammunition. That is not a bunch of Israeli strike. They're not striking. It's coming up. This is secondary explosions from ammunition storage. That to me, that's the only way you can explain this.
حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل.
When we can convince the Arab world to record vertically, that is when, horizontally or vertically. God, he's already confused me. When we convince them to hold their phones sideways, that is when we shall achieve peace in the Middle East. Okay, so there was a strike in or around the Syrian airbase. That has been lent to the Russians indefinitely. We have some different reports that seem to kind of clash with each other about whether it was in the airbase or outside the airbase or next to it or wherever it was. But the point is that this intermediary point between Iran and Lebanon has been hit, the ammunition destroyed, and it was very close to the Russian airbase. Now, that doesn't mean that it was the Russians shuttling these weapons to Hezbollah. But then again, we also know that many of the militants that Israel has been fighting are using Russian weapons. And we can see them because, they have it in their hands. They're fighting with it. They're firing with it. And so it does lead you to think, like, where exactly are these weapons coming from? Have these weapons just always been on the international arms market and then Hezbollah just bought them up or Hamas bought them up? Or did Russia sell them directly or give them in some sort of aid package in return for something? Maybe they gave them to the Iranians and then the Iranians transferred them to the Lebanese. And the reason I bring up that theory is because we already all know, because it's public record, that the Iranians have shipped ballistic missiles to Russia, and then Russia took those ballistic missiles and then fired them at Ukraine. They're also doing this with North Korean weapons as well. The Shahed drones, which have terrified much of Ukraine, they sound like tractors going over, or maybe a lawnmower. No, lawnmower is more accurate. A lawnmower flying over your house before impact. Those were Iranian designed. And originally Iranian produced, but now they're largely being produced in Russia, domestically made. They used to be white. Now the Russians have begun painting them black and sending them during nighttime to make it harder for the anti-air systems in Ukraine to knock them down. And if the Iranians are providing, drones and then drone models and then, licensing it so the Russians can then make those drones, and they're also, providing ballistic missiles and otherwise, if they're willing to do this for the Russians, things are not done on the international stage just purely from the kindness of your own heart. There's something on the other end here. It's the same thing when it comes to North Korea and the Russians getting shipped tons of North Korean weapons, ammunitions, and such so he can continue to push his war. There must be something given in return. These types of deals are not made for no reason. And so my question is to you, what was the deal? What did the Iranians get from the Russians that made it worth giving them all those ballistic missiles and allowing them to produce the Shahed drones, giving them the Shahed drones? What made it worth it? And we see Russian weapons in the hands of these militants. I'm not saying that I know that the Russians are shipping weapons to Iran and then those weapons are being shipped to mid-area points in Syria and then from those midway points to Lebanon to then be put in the hands of a Hezbollah fighter fighting the Israeli soldiers that are now skirmishing with them on the border. But I am saying that every action requires an equal and opposite reaction. And if the Iranians gave the Russians ballistic missiles and drones, the Russians had to give them something. What that something was, I don't know. Either way, this does indicate that the Russian-Israeli relationship is not as flowery as it used to be, is not as, understanding, I think is a perfect word, as it used to be. Now, there's a lot more conflict because there's no way that the Russians are happy with these strikes being so close. I don't know if the Russians really have the wiggle room to react to this. What are the Russians going to do? Bomb Israel? They're going to bomb Israeli air bases? The last thing Russia needs right now is another enemy. It has its hands full enough trying to conquer Ukraine, the largest country fully inside Europe. Anyway, this does seem to be a low point in Israeli-Russian relations. What will be the side effects of this or the ripple effects of this, how the Russians will react to this, we still do not know. We're still waiting for an official Russian government reaction. In the meantime, if I was the Russians, I would push Hezbollah or other storage facilities that might be close to you very far away. Also, I did want to say quickly, look at this Kiev Post article in reaction to this. Now that's chutzpah. Israel strikes trample on U.S. and Russian quote-unquote red lines, while Washington insists that Ukraine needs to respect Putin's red lines to avoid escalation. Israel stomps all over them by blowing up the Kremlin's largest overseas airbase. And can I tell you, I've seen quite a few messages on Twitter from Ukrainians where they're just baffled at the fact that the Israelis can get away with bombing near or in Russian air bases while they are shit out of luck. Okay, where were we? Oh boy, I think we could talk about oil prices. Who doesn't want to have the exciting conversation on oil prices and how it affects geopolitics?